Okay, she be gone every single night. Day and night on my mind, pushing you to vibe.
How's it going, everybody? This is Toolbox Design. Hope you're having another great day, and welcome back to another video. Alright folks, it's time for another edition of Bad Game Reviews. In this series, I review all the games in my collection. I review the PlayStations 1, 2, 3, or 4 that I find to be just insanely bad. And unfortunately, the game that we will be looking at today is a game called Ford Racing. Now this game is the very first game of the Ford Racing franchise, and it's also the only release from the Ford Racing franchise for the PlayStation 1. This game was published by Empire Interactive all the way back in March of 2001. However, this was actually already released by them on the PC at least a few months earlier back in 2000, but 2001 was the year that this game came out for the PlayStation 1. Unlike all the Ford Racing games that will come after this one focuses more on motorsport style racing. In this game, you actually get to race a whole different kind of Ford race cars across a few different tracks, like for example the F-150 race truck, the Taurus, along with the Mustang, Escort, and a whole bunch of other Fords as well. And you race around a whole bunch of various racetracks as well. And the challenge is that there are 10 different kinds of championships that you have to go through. And so in order to progress, you have to win each championship to unlock brand new Fords and also brand new racetracks as well. This game can take a little while to complete because obviously each one of them has a different kind of modes. Obviously, the further you progress, the harder and harder this game is ultimately going to become. And so winning every championship there is in this game and unlocking every new and more powerful Ford cars there are is vital in order to be successful at this game. But not all of it is easy, and it's also a very crappy game as well. Yes, I say it. I mean, all the Ford Racing games that came after this were really good. However, for the original game in the Ford Racing franchise, it was not a very solid game. And the very first reason I say that is for its gameplay. You don't see this on any of the other Ford Racing games that would come after us, but for the original one, it was really hard. And a lot of the reasons is for, all the controls and all that stuff. Usually cars are meant to have a different kind of handling style that you can be able to control. In this one, it's just very hard to be able to control your car. For example, all of those tight racetracks that you race at, when you're trying to turn a car around with your left analog stick or the directional buttons or something like that, the problem is that it can only go on a separate angle, and even if you're hitting the brakes and you're turning correctly, there's a good possibility that you can end up in the grass and you'll still end up hitting the wall, or maybe you end up right in a gravel trap or something like that. Not only that, the cars slide around quite a bit as well. It's like Hooters Road Trip, which I had reviewed a couple months back. It's really hard to be able to control a car because it's really sliding around quite a bit. Not only that, it's really hard for you to be able to pull away from many of the other drivers. Usually in a whole bunch of racing games, you would have a certain difficulty mode which can, whether or not you want to get a fair advantage over the rest of the field. Not here. Even if it's on easy mode, stuff like that, it's just very hard to be able to have a decisive advantage against all the other competitors. You really would have to adjust the handling along with the mechanics of your cars just so that way you can be able to get ahead of the rest of the pack. And not only that, for a game that takes a while to complete, there are not a whole lot of tournaments that you can compete at, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a little bit. But it really, the fact that there are still a few amount of tracks and cars as well makes this a rather disappointing game as well. So yeah, it's really hard to be able to control your cars and really hard to be able to play this game because the gameplay of this is really not as good as it is supposed to be. And really, when you're making your first game and what is supposed to be a franchise, it really needs to have a really good start. Obviously, they would be able to bounce back on that with future games, but for this one, it was not a very good start, and the gameplay of it as a result is just really hard to fathom. The artificial intelligence is also pretty bad in this game. Usually, you would be able to find a way to play against these guys in a more sensible fashion, but here, it's just very hard to race these guys because even when you're trying to get away from them, when you're in a corner, for some reason, they end up getting in the corners and getting after you much faster than they should be, and they can actually end up running right into the back of you, and that enough can end up forcing you off the track, unfortunately, and cost you a whole lot of ground and a whole lot of time. And not only that, those are moments where that ends up costing you the race as a result. I mean, it's really hard to be able to race clean around these guys when the AI is pretty much the way it is. And as I said before, the cars are really hard to control by yourself, but for some reason the cars in Ford Racing, they're a little bit easier for the AI than it is for the regular player on its own. And I do not understand why. I find that to be a little disappointing. I feel like that if my car is going to be that sideways, everybody else should be as well. It should not be a fair disadvantage for the players going up against the AI. And unfortunately, as a result, this makes competition a lot tougher. As a result, it's like the competition gets a fairer advantage over the players that are playing the game, because really they can do whatever they want while you're just trying to control your car, and as a result, it really puts you at a disadvantage, and that allows them to be able to do whatever they want, run you right off the track and costing you the race. It's not fair for the players that are trying to beat this game. As I said before, that's why you have to really adjust the handling of your cars, just so that way you can be able to get ahead of these guys and try to win these races, because otherwise chances are the AI is really going to mess with you, and unfortunately that happens quite a bit here in this game. Also, the amount of cars and tracks that they have in this game, I feel like it's really short. Unfortunately, there are just not a whole lot of cars and tracks that are in this game to allow you to really get the full experience of this particular game. I mean, really, the car selection, especially since it's mainly just about Ford racing, I just feel like that there aren't enough cars to make this feel like it's worth a satisfying experience. As I said before, the more tournaments that you win, the more cars that you unlock. But unfortunately, they all vary. Like I said before, they can be like sedans, trucks, or maybe even like sports cars or supercars or something like that. They're all in more auto racing form, unlike in future games, obviously. But again, each one performs differently. And unfortunately, if you can't handle them correctly, it's going to become much harder for you to be able to beat this game. And unfortunately, as I said before, there just are not enough cars for you to be able to enjoy this game. I really wish there was a much more steeper car selection for this, because I feel like that this would make this game a lot more fun, and also the option to allow you to choose what car you want to race in before you get into the game, instead of having to decide what tournament you want to go into and let the car decide for itself. I feel like that's a real opportunity that Empire missed here when developing this game. And as I said before, same thing with cars, the tracks, you have to win each tournament to unlock new tracks as well. And like I said before, there are also very few tracks. I believe there's only like 8 or 10 of them in this game, and that's really unfortunate. There needs to be a real expansion of racetracks, like in Gran Turismo, where they can go like virtually anywhere. Here, it's really almost like it's just the same track. It's just that they just really changed it up and reconfigured it every single time, just so it looks like it's a really different track. The only difference is it's probably more of the same location. I mean, and that's really a shame, because it looks like that it's the same location, even though in the description it says that it's in a different place. However, again, it should not feel like that when you're at that particular track, and I feel like that's real disappointing. So reconfiguration and all that stuff, I feel like that's a little disappointing, and the fact that there are not enough tracks and cars in this game to make this game a worthwhile experience, I feel like Empire dropped the ball on that. Then you have the sound, and man, it is like doggone awful. The first thing I want to talk about here is the soundtrack. I feel like this is probably one of the most generic soundtracks that you can have when you're playing a racing game. It just feels really off. I don't know, it feels like it's more of a techno mix style soundtrack that you have whenever you're playing a game like Wipeout or something like that. Not for Ford Racing, which in this one, unlike in future games, takes more in a motorsport style format. And really, when you get into the actual game itself, you really need to have like a better soundtrack. Maybe like a whole lot of hard rock music in the background or something like that once you get on the actual track. Not the bland, like general main menu style soundtrack that you usually hear in the main menu. The soundtrack is just bland, and it really doesn't get you in the mood for racing whatsoever. And the sounds of the cars itself, it's really brutal as well. In fact, the only sound you hear from the cars whenever you're turning is your own car. You only hear your sound whenever you're getting up to a top speed. You only hear your tires whenever you're screeching around in a corner or something like that. And even when you hit another competitor or you go around them, you don't even hear their sound of their car whatsoever. You only hear yours. And so the sound is just like very off as a result. It's almost like everywhere road trip. You don't even hear all the sounds from all the other cars, unfortunately, because you only hear yours. And the same thing can really bode here with Ford Racing. You don't even hear everybody else. In a game like like NASCAR and all that stuff, whenever you're around other competitors, you would hear the full throttle sound of all the other cars around you, which really makes you feel like that you're right in the middle of the action. Here you don't really feel like that. You just feel like that you're really out there on your own on the racetrack. That's a shame. I really don't know how it would have felt like if they had included all of that for all the other guys around the game. The fact that you only hear your own car in this game, it really feels like the sound was not done very well in this game. And also for the sound itself, it's like screeching loud and it feels like a record disc scratch, unfortunately. So I really don't want to know what it would have looked like if they had included it there, but the sound just wasn't very good. Finally, I really feel like Empire was trying to make this game look better than it should be. You know, there was a lot of rumors of false advertising this game. Like, this game provides you a real unique racing experience. It puts you right in the middle of the action and really gives you an opportunity to learn what it's like to go around a racetrack in a car from the manufacturer Ford and win a whole bunch of races in doing so. Folks, the commercials are one thing, but if you're promising a real unique racing game from the commercials, you really have to reflect that in the game. And unfortunately, the way this game played out for the PlayStation 1, it really felt like a lot of false advertising was put out by Empire to try to make this game a lot better than it should be. And unfortunately, the gameplay in itself really showed why they were lying. In fact, I read the only way you were able to actually experience a unique style racing format is if you were playing this on the PC. In fact, for all the advertising, everybody says you only see it for the PC. On the PlayStation 1, you do not see that whatsoever. And as a result, unlike in PC, I mean, I really don't know how it would look like if I was playing this on the PC, but on the PlayStation 1, it really feels like just another generic racing game. Look, this doesn't reach the level of All-Star Racing, thankfully. I mean, that game is bad enough on its own. But Ford Racing, you would not expect to see something like this. I mean, you really, if you're going to advertise this as a solid start to what would be a traditional racing franchise for the manufacturer Ford, you really need to advertise it like this is going to be the start of a really strong and very solid franchise. Unfortunately, they did not make it that way, and really the advertising as a result made it look a whole lot worse than it should. I really can only imagine the PR nightmare that Empire went through when this game came out. So yeah, I feel like Empire was really just lying to the customers' faces when they were selling this game, promising that it would be a unique racing experience, and unfortunately it just did not play out when I got this game. It just did not feel very good, and unfortunately it just makes this just another generic racing game, and that's really unfortunate. As I said before, this was the first game of the Ford Racing franchise. There would be a whole bunch of other games that Empire, along with a couple other developers, would release for this particular franchise. In fact, Ford Racing 2 would not come until a couple years later in 2003, and that still, in my opinion, is my favorite game of the Ford Racing franchise. I feel like that was really the peak of the Ford Racing franchise, and of course, they would have Ford Racing 3, and maybe a few spin-off Ford games as well, like Ford Mustang, The Legend Lives, and well, I believe an off-road truck racing game that they would have for Ford. Not Ford Truck Mania, but another Ford game that, in which they have like off-road racing and all that stuff. So all the other games in that franchise, those were really inferior compared to this one. The reason why I say that is because unlike this one, all future Ford Racing games, they managed to find a way to excel, so that way they give the player the full and exuberating racing experience. And I feel like they really perfected that in Ford Racing 2. Yeah, it still had its flaws, unfortunately, but hey, they found a way to learn from the mistakes of this game to make Ford Racing 2 and a whole bunch of their other games in the future a lot better than this one. So give Empire a lot of credit for that. They found a way to learn from their mistakes in this one, and they were able to make the rest of the franchise a lot better. But again, it's how you start that determines how long this franchise is going to be around and how long it's going to be successful. And unfortunately, I feel like that for this game, it really did put a bit of a dent on how they were able to translate that to the rest of the franchise. Look, I like video games in which you're racing around for like a certain manufacturer. Like, there are games out there for Chevrolet and a whole bunch of other manufacturers as well. So really to see a game focus only on like Ford Racing, it really feels like, you know, like if you're a Ford fan or a fan of the manufacturer on its own, this would be a game that would be very exciting for you when this first came out in 2001. There's a lot of excitement, you get to race your favorite Ford cars and just have a whole lot of fun. But this game ended up turning out to be a disappointment, unfortunately. There just wasn't enough cars and tracks to make this a real exhilarating experience. It was just hard to play it, and unfortunately, it just did not feel like that you really had a good racing experience on the PlayStation 1. And really, it was a bad start for what would be a pretty good racing franchise there on out. Give Empire Interactive a lot of credit for learning from their mistakes and making the rest of the franchise better, but unfortunately, this was not a good start. Ford Racing did not excel to the level that it should be, and as a result, this unfortunately ends up as yet another bad game in my video game collection. So that will do it for this review. As I said before, this is just one of many games that I have in my collection that were pretty awful in my opinion, so I would like to let you know what other games you would like for me to review, whether it's good games or bad games like this one. You let me know. Let me know down in the comments below. I'll look at my collection and I'll do a review on them as soon as I possibly can. Anyways, that's gonna do it for another video. I hope you all enjoyed it. As always, if you'd like to see more of my content, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when my latest video is released. Comment below for future suggestions for all my videos, whether it's vlogs, projects, or challenges, or video game content, you name it, leave it in the comments below and I'll do my best to make them. As always, follow me in my social media. All the links are in the description below. That'll do it for another video. Hope you're having another great day. And as always, I hope to see all of you again in another video very soon. And hopefully your experience with Ford Racing is a little bit better than the experience that I had when I was playing this game. So long, everybody.